What if I told you that the company boasting about its family culture, right? The
Yeah.
one with the toxic positivity and, this mandate of extreme niceness. What if I told you that is actually the most hostile, deeply draining place you could possibly work?
Yeah, it sounds completely backwards, right? But it's true.
It is. And, today we're taking a massive detour from the usual corporate survival guides. Because for you, tuning in right now, maybe you're commuting, maybe you're prepping for a really tough week or like a complex dynamic at the office, we're getting into a stack of sources that completely flip the script.
Right. The core briefing we're looking at is called Navigating Passive-Aggressive Cultures, Spiritual Armor for the Corporate Battlefield.
Which is an amazing title, by the way.
It really is. And we've got these extensive philosophical debates and tactical case studies that go with it. And the main argument here is that modern corporate hostility isn't loud.
No, it's totally silent.
Exactly. It's completely silent, it's weaponized, and it is, frankly, just neurologically draining.
It's so draining. And that premise, this idea that extreme niceness is actually toxic, I think the briefing calls it the niceness paradox.
Yes, the niceness paradox. It's this concept in organizational psychology where if a corporate culture demands that everyone be, like, perpetually pleasant all the time.
Just smiling, nodding, yeah.
Right, it effectively bans open, respectful disagreement. But, the natural friction of human beings trying to work together on hard problems, that doesn't just evaporate because someone hung a Be Kind poster in the break room.
I mean, we wish it did, but it doesn't.
Right. So the friction is forced underground. It metamorphoses from healthy debate into covert sabotage.
Which brings us to the mission of this deep dive. Because, if you're dealing with this, we are not going to sit here and talk about how to escalate your grievances to HR.
No, definitely not.
Or, how to draft the perfect petty per my last email response. That's just playing their game.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Our mission today is to equip you with this radical perspective shift. We're going to explore how pulling from literally thousands of years of ancient philosophy can help you build an unbreakable internal resilience, something that just entirely neutralizes this specific brand of workplace hostility.
And it makes so much sense when you look at the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
Because navigating modern office politics, it's less like a traditional battlefield where you can see the enemy, and it's much more like an autoimmune disease.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Because the very mechanisms that are supposed to keep the company healthy, like civility, HR protocols, standardized communication, those are the exact things attacking the healthy workers.
Yeah.
It's like playing high-stakes 3D chess in the dark.
In the dark, yeah.
You can't see the board, but every single move just drains your battery.
The autoimmune metaphor is perfectly aligned with what the sources call weaponized civility.
Weaponized civility. Let's unpack that.
So to defeat this enemy, you have to understand the systemic rewards and punishments that created it in the first place. In a modern corporate structure, overt conflict is heavily penalized.
Right. You can't just yell at someone.
Exactly. If you raise your voice in a meeting, or if you provide blunt, unvarnished feedback, you instantly trigger the corporate immune response. You get labeled as, difficult to work with or not a culture fit.
The dreaded not a culture fit.
It's a career killer, but at the exact same time, the hyper-competitive individual rewards, the promotions, the bonuses, getting visibility with the executives, all of that remains totally intact.
So you have this environment where people are forced to ruthlessly compete for scarce resources, but they're literally forbidden from fighting.
Right. So they adapt. The system punishes the loud fighter, so it naturally selects for the silent saboteur. People express their hostility through covert channels.
Right.
They use surface-level politeness, formal corporate jargon.
Just bubbling this up.
Yes. Just bubbling this up, right? They use rigid adherence to bureaucratic rules to inflict psychological harm, all while maintaining absolute plausible deniability.
And the cost of this, I think this was the most shocking part of the data and the sources. The cost of this adaptation is just staggering.
It's massive. Organizational psychology research shows that indirect aggression, so gossip, withholding information, passive-aggressive delays, that causes up to 40% more lost productivity and turnover than direct, overt conflicts.
Wait, 40%?
40%.
That is a massive operational hemorrhage. Why is the silent version so much more destructive than someone just getting mad and yelling at you in a conference room?
Well, it comes down to the neurobiology of ambiguity.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the human brain is essentially a prediction machine. When an overt threat happens, let's say a colleague looks you dead in the eye and says, "Your code is garbage and I hate working with you."
Ouch. but clear.
Exactly. Your brain immediately understands the threat. It categorizes the conflict, your amygdala spikes, but your prefrontal cortex, the logical part of your brain, can quickly map out a response. You can defend your work, you can report them to HR, you can just walk away. The loop closes.
The threat is resolved. But with weaponized civility, the loop never closes.
Never. Because the threat is ambiguous. You get an email that says, I'm surprised you chose this approach given the team's historical struggles, but I trust your unique judgment.
Oh, wow. I felt my blood pressure rise just hearing you say that.
Right. Your prediction mechanism completely misfires. Your amygdala sounds the alarm because it senses a social threat, but your prefrontal cortex can't find an overt danger to neutralize. Because technically, the words are polite.
I trust your unique judgment. It's so passive-aggressive.
Exactly. So your brain starts looping. It simulates dozens of different scenarios trying to decode the subtext. And that simulation process requires massive metabolic resources. You are burning actual glucose, draining the high-level executive function that you need to, engineer software or design a marketing strategy, just trying to solve this petty social puzzle.
Wow, so if your brain is burning that much energy just trying to decipher a single email, what does the actual, encrypted message look like in the wild? Because the briefing maps out these specific patterns of covert hostility.
The 4 archetypes.
Right, the archetypes. And honestly, reading through these, it felt like finally getting the translation key to that 40% cognitive drain. It's like, oh, I know these people.
Everybody knows these people. Recognizing the patterns is the very first step to neutralizing the threat. When you can look at hostility as a mechanical, predictable corporate maneuver rather than like a deeply personal assault, its ability to trigger your amygdala drops dramatically.
So let's go through them. The first archetype in the brief is the CC Slayer.
The CC Slayer. This relies entirely on the concept of weaponized visibility.
Yes, weaponized visibility. So the CC Slayer is usually perfectly friendly to you in one-on-one interactions. But the exact moment you make a trivial error, a typo in a slide deck, or a minor timeline miscalculation, they send an email correcting you, and they subtly CC your manager.
And their manager. And maybe a VP.
Right. And the overt message is always something innocent, like, hey, just keeping everyone in the loop. But the covert mechanism is that they're building a subtle paper trail of your incompetence, all under the guise of being helpful.
It's brilliant in a really dark way. It operates like a corporate panopticon. They force you to perform under this constant, vague threat of executive surveillance. You never know when the hammer is going to fall, so you're always on edge.
But what happens when the weapon isn't an email, but the complete lack of one? Because that brings us to archetype number 2, the chronic delayer.
Yes, the chronic delayer. Their whole brand is sabotage via inaction.
Right, and these people are outwardly so enthusiastic.
Oh, they're the nicest people in the meeting.
They nod, they agree to project scopes publicly, they take on deadlines with a smile. But in private, when it actually comes time to do the work, they systematically fail to deliver. And they always cite, competing priorities or unexpected roadblocks.
And the psychology of the chronic delayer is built entirely on plausible deniability. You can't accuse them of malice because their excuses are always operationally valid.
Right. You can't be like, you're sabotaging me, because they just say, I'm swamped with the Q3 rollout.
Exactly. And if you call them out, you look like the tyrant who just doesn't understand cross-departmental bandwidth issues. They completely undermine the team's velocity, but they do it with an apologetic smile.
Okay, so then the third pattern shifts from inaction to feedback. This is the backhanded mentor. And they use what the briefing calls conditional validation.
Conditional validation is devastating. This archetype gives you praise, but it is meticulously wrapped in structural doubt.
There's a classic example from the case studies that made me laugh out loud because it's so real. They say something like, your presentation was surprisingly coherent, given how little time you've spent understanding the client's core business model.
It's so toxic. And it induces immediate cognitive dissonance in the receiver because your brain hears the compliment, coherent, but feels the insult, little time understanding. So you're paralyzed.
Right, because if you say thank you, you're accepting the insult.
And if you get angry, you look totally ungrateful for the compliment. It's a linguistic trap designed purely to undermine your authority.
And finally, the fourth archetype, the ghost approver.
The master of the evasion of accountability.
Yes. The ghost approver will vertically champion a risky strategic pivot in the hallway or, on a Zoom call. They'll be like, yes, love this direction, let's go for it. But they will absolutely refuse to provide clear written sign-off.
They will never reply approved to the critical email.
Never. And this leaves the technical team completely exposed. Because if the initiative fails, the ghost approver has no paper trail tying them to the disaster.
But if it succeeds...
Oh, if it succeeds, their verbal championing positions them perfectly to take all the credit, as I was saying in the hallway last month.
Exactly. And the terrifying part of these 4 archetypes is just how quickly they replicate. The sources delve into this contagion effect, showing that these behaviors are incredibly viral, especially in highly technical or engineering environments.
Why technical environments specifically?
Well, the virality is driven by mirror neurons and the normalization of deviance. Behavioral researchers have tracked how passive-aggressive communication spreads. If management tolerates a single high-performing individual who uses these tactics, like, let's say, a brilliant 10x engineer who refuses to document their code and uses CC slang to intimidate junior devs, that tolerance sends a powerful systemic signal.
The signal being, the rules don't apply if you hit your targets.
Precisely. The rest of the team realizes that overt HR rules do not apply to high performers, and that covert hostility is the actual unwritten currency of power in that office. The data shows a single tolerated bad actor can shift an entire department's baseline culture in just 6 months.
6 months to completely normalize toxicity. That's terrifying.
It really is.
And if the contagion spreads that fast, draining the prefrontal cortex of your best talent and modern HR frameworks are just completely blind to it because it doesn't trigger any overt policy violations. I mean, we're looking at a fundamentally broken playbook. The modern tools do not work.
They don't. Which is why, to survive, the sources argue we have to look outside the modern era entirely. We actually have to travel back a few millennia.
Yes. Okay, this is the pivot point of the briefing. It introduces the philosophical foundation of spiritual armor, and it draws heavily from the Bhagavad Gita and Stoic traditions. But before we get into the actual armor itself, we have to talk about the environment it was forged in. The sources demand this radical psychological reframing called the corporate crucible.
The corporate crucible. So usually when we are trapped in a hostile office, we view the environment as this illegitimate barrier to our happiness, right? We tell ourselves, I would be productive, I would be at peace if only my manager wasn't a backhanded mentor, or if only my colleague wasn't a CC slayer.
Right. We view the toxicity as an interruption to our real life. Like, this isn't supposed to be happening.
Exactly. The corporate crucible reframes that completely. The toxic workplace is not a barrier to your peace. It is a high-intensity training ground specifically designed to test and refine your emotional mastery.
Oh, wow.
You transition from being a victim of a broken culture to an athlete training in a high-resistance environment. The resistance is the point. The hostility is the weight you are lifting to build neuroplasticity and spiritual resilience.
That is a massive shift, which brings the Bhagavad Gita into stunningly sharp focus here. Because for you listening, you might be wondering, what does an ancient Eastern philosophical text have to do with my, 10 a.m. marketing sync?
A lot, actually.
The historical context the sources provide is incredible. Because the Gita wasn't written in a tranquil monastery. It wasn't some peaceful meditation retreat.
No, it was delivered on the literal battlefield of Kurukshetra, moments before a massive, devastating war. And the specific nature of that war is why it maps so perfectly to the corporate world.
Right, because of who Arjuna is fighting.
Exactly. The protagonist, Arjuna, is not fighting faceless strangers. He's not fighting an invading alien army. He is looking across the battlefield at his own uncles, his former teachers, his cousins, the people who trained him, the people he grew up with.
He is facing his own corporate family.
That is the moral ambiguity. You aren't fighting a rival company. You are fighting the colleague sitting right next to you. You are fighting the manager who hired you.
And Arjuna is paralyzed by the emotional weight of this betrayal, which is exactly how a professional feels when a trusted peer suddenly becomes a ghost approver and leaves them to take the fall. The stakes are incredibly high, the environment is hostile, and you have to perform complex duties in the middle of all this chaos.
And in response to Arjuna's paralysis, the text introduces the foundational concept of spiritual armor, Nishkama karma.
Let's break down the Sanskrit on that.
So Nishkama means desireless or without attachment. Karma means action. So it is action performed without attachment to its fruits or results. The thesis is articulated in Chapter 2, verse 47, which essentially states, "You have a right to perform your prescribed duties, but you are never entitled to the fruits of your actions."
Translating that into the modern corporate framework, that means drawing a hard, bright line between attachment to your craft and attachment to the outcome.
Exactly.
Like, if you are a software engineer, your prescribed duty is your craft. Writing clean architecture, deploying secure code, communicating transparently with your team. You have total agency over that
You
execution.
control that completely.
But the fruits of that action, whether your manager gives you a glowing review, whether you get public credit at the all-hands meeting, whether the CC Slayer respects you, you actually have zero control over those outcomes.
Zero. And tying your emotional stability to outcomes you cannot control is the absolute definition of the expectation trap.
The expectation.
Workplace hostility draws its power from your expectation of fairness. When you expect a backstabbing colleague to suddenly act with integrity, their betrayal hurts. You are caught in a dopamine loop of seeking corporate validation.
And Nishkama karma severs that loop.
It severs it completely. You detach your self-worth from office politics. You execute high-quality work with absolute dedication, but you relinquish the expectation of corporate gratitude. And by severing the expectation, you eliminate the primary vector of your own emotional suffering.
The hostility just becomes inert. The CC Slayer can send their snarky emails all day long, but they can't touch the integrity of the code you wrote. They lose their leverage because you no longer value their validation.
Which leads directly to the second core principle from the Gita, which describes the state of mind you achieve when you actually practice this. It's called Siddhaprajna and Samatvam.
Sthiropraxis.
Yes. It refers to an individual of steady, unshakable wisdom, someone who is firmly established in their own intellect. And that state is maintained through Samatvam, which translates to equanimity. The text actually defines yoga itself as this very equanimity in the face of extreme dualities. So, success and failure, heat and cold, praise and blame.
So in the context of like a Tuesday afternoon at the office, equanimity means maintaining the exact same neurological baseline, the exact same internal stillness when you receive a massive year-end bonus as you do when you read a wildly passive-aggressive Slack thread dissecting your recent project.
Yes. Your internal emotional ecosystem is no longer dictated by the external weather of the office. You are anchored internally. You observe the praise and you observe the blame, but neither is allowed to penetrate the core of your identity.
Okay, I have to jump in and challenge this, though, because this is where the philosophy collides hard with reality.
Let's hear it.
Non-attachment, relinquishing the fruits of your actions. If I completely detach from the outcome of my work, isn't that just a 2,000-year-old Sanskrit justification for quiet quitting?
Ah, right.
I mean, in a hyper-competitive capitalist system, promotion and visibility are inherently linked to political maneuvering. If I refuse to play the game, aren't I just inviting the sharks to steamroll me while I sit there in my steady wisdom?
That tension is arguably the most critical debate addressed in the sources. Does radical non-attachment cripple your corporate career advancement? And the rebuttal requires understanding the difference between deep work and shallow political work.
Okay, unpack that.
Non-attachment is not passivity. It is not docility or apathy. When you practice Nishkama karma, your focus is not diminished. It is intensely magnified. Think back to the metabolic drain we discussed earlier.
Right, the 40% drain.
Exactly. The game player is burning 40% of their prefrontal cortex analyzing subtext, worrying about who gets credit, and managing their optics. The professional wearing spiritual armor is dedicating 100% of their cognitive bandwidth to undeniable technical mastery.
So the lack of anxiety acts as a force multiplier for competence.
Undeniably. And look, while executive leadership might reward the political game players during peacetime, corporate ecosystems inevitably face crises.
The servers go down, the market crashes.
Right. And when a massive operational failure occurs, which, by the way, is often caused by the very politicking and ghost-approving we discussed, the game players panic. Because they only know how to manage optics, not solve actual problems.
They're just looking for who to blame.
Exactly. In those moments, executives are forced to rely entirely on the Sthitaprajna, the leader who is calm, unshakable, and possesses supreme technical competence because they spent their energy on the craft, not the subtext. In the long run, extreme competence under pressure is the ultimate political currency.
So you aren't stepping away from the work. You are stepping away from the noise, which makes the work undeniably better.
Precisely.
But that leads to an even darker debate in the material. Does teaching employees to build spiritual armor inadvertently normalize toxic environments.
This is a huge point of friction.
Yeah, because we are discussing how to build a psychological hazmat suit. You put on a hazmat suit so you can breathe clearly and navigate a toxic waste dump safely. But a hazmat suit is a temporary measure. If you have to wear it 40 hours a week, year after year, doesn't that imply the environment is ultimately unsurvivable? Aren't we just giving victims a coping mechanism for an abusive relationship instead of telling them to get out?
That is the critical threshold, and the sources are explicitly clear on this boundary. Spiritual armor is not a tool for enduring abuse indefinitely. The suit will eventually degrade if exposed to infinite toxicity.
So what's the goal of the armor then?
The purpose of the armor is to provide the cognitive clarity necessary to make objective, empowered choices. When a professional is subjected to chronic passive aggression without this armor, they exist in a perpetual state of fight or flight. Their amygdala is hijacked.
They can't think straight.
Right. And in that state, you make terrible career decisions. You either react with a furious outburst that gets you fired, or you freeze, becoming so exhausted and burned out that you can't even muster the energy to update your resume.
Ah, so the armor buys you the space between stimulus and response.
It does. It entirely prevents the panicked reaction. It allows you to look at the environment objectively and ask, is this a culture I can influence and repair from within? Or is this infrastructure fundamentally broken?
If it is broken.
If it is broken, the armor allows you to calmly, methodically execute a strategic exit plan. You interview at healthier companies with confidence, completely protecting your mental health and preventing burnout on your way out the door. You use the hazmat suit to walk out of the building?
That distinction is vital. You use the suit to walk out. Which brings us to the third major philosophical friction point. Equanimity versus repressed rage.
Right.
Attempting to be this unshakable Zen practitioner while a backhanded mentor is actively trying to destroy your credibility.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are just pasting a fake smile over genuine human betrayal, you are going to give yourself an ulcer. The neurobiology of suppressing anger is just as damaging as expressing it.
It is. The psychological framework here requires a precise understanding of the difference between suppression and observation. Suppression is an active metabolic process. It takes immense energy to, hold a beach ball underwater.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
When you suppress an emotion, you feel the anger, you judge it as unprofessional or bad, and you forcefully shove it down into your subconscious. You pretend it doesn't exist. True equanimity samatvam is the opposite of denial. It is the practice of letting the beach ball float on the surface of the water. You observe it, but you don't play with it.
So if equanimity isn't suppression, then neurologically we're talking about feeling the anger, letting the heart rate spike, letting the cortisol release, but completely decoupling that physiological reaction from the keyboard. You observe the emotion without acting from it.
You map the internal state perfectly. When the passive-aggressive attack arrives, the practitioner of equanimity acknowledges the raw emotion instantly. The internal monologue is explicit. They say to themselves, I am experiencing intense anger. My chest is tight. I feel deeply betrayed by this action.
And don't run from it.
No, they watch the emotion wash over their nervous system without judging themselves for feeling it, but they insert a wedge of consciousness between the feeling and the action. They choose not to let that temporary neurochemical spike dictate their external behavior.
The philosophy is airtight. It protects the work, it prevents victimhood, and it processes the emotions safely. But philosophy alone shatters when your inbox actually pings at 9 p.m. with a toxic message.
Yeah, theories are great until Tuesday morning happens.
Exactly. How do we tactically forge this armor on a daily basis? Because the briefing outlines these highly actionable day-to-day mechanics, starting with the bookends of the day, these circadian rhythms of cognitive compartmentalization.
Right. The routines are structured as armor on and armor off.
So what does armor on look like?
The morning routine, armor on, is an intense setting practice. Before you engage with any corporate infrastructure, before you open Slack, before email, before the morning stand-up, you spend 2 minutes establishing your internal baseline.
So before the CC Slayer can even reach you.
Exactly. You wire your brain for Nishkama karma before the first threat appears. You explicitly remind yourself, my intrinsic value is not defined by corporate feedback today. I will encounter anxious, hostile people. Their actions reflect their internal state, not my worth. I will focus entirely on clean execution and treat everyone with composure.
You are calibrating your prefrontal cortex to recognize ambiguity not as a threat, but as noise, just static.
Right, and the evening mindful offboarding armor off is arguably even more important.
Yeah, you don't want to sleep in the hazmat suit.
Exactly. At the end of the day, you must perform a formal mental close. You acknowledge the frustrations, consciously release your attachment to whatever outcomes occurred that day, and sever the digital connection. Turn off the notifications. If you don't take the armor off, the toxicity bleeds into your personal health and your family time. You are basically allowing the CC Slayer to sit at your dinner table.
Nobody wants to see Slayer at dinner. But when you are in the thick of the workday and the attack actually breaches your perimeter, what do? The primary in-the-moment tactic here is depersonalization.
Depersonalization.
Hmm.
You must understand the psychology of projection. Passive aggression is almost never about the target.
It's not about you.
No, it is an outward projection of the attacker's own profound internal anxiety, their imposter syndrome, or their terror of obsolescence. When a colleague sends a hostile message, they are not revealing a truth about your competence. They are utilizing an ego defense mechanism to manage their own psychological pain.
It's kind of wild because realizing that the backhanded mentor is just projecting their own fear actually triggers a weird sense of pity instead of defensiveness.
Yeah, it completely changes the dynamic.
But even with that intellectual understanding, I know my amygdala still reacts to a nasty email. My heart still races. Which is why the 24-hour emotional decoupling rule is just the ultimate circuit breaker.
It's a lifesaver. Because of the half-life of cortisol and adrenaline, responding to a threat while emotionally activated guarantees a degraded outcome. When the triggering message arrives, you must acknowledge the physical sensation of defensiveness and then physically separate yourself from the interface. Walk away from the screen.
Close the laptop. And the sources suggest a brilliant pressure release valve here. You open a private offline document and you write the raw draft.
The raw draft is so cathartic.
You let the amygdala take the wheel. You type out all the venom, all the defensiveness, every petty counterattack you want to launch. You clear the emotional charge from your nervous system by making it tangible. But, and this is critical, you ensure the attacker's email address is nowhere near the to field.
Do it in a text editor, never in the email client.
Yes. So you purge the metabolic buildup. Then, hours later, when your executive function has returned to baseline, what's the next step?
Then you draft the actual response. You remove every adjective, every self-defense, every hint of emotional tone. You stick strictly to verified facts, direct questions, and logical next steps. This is the foundation of the absolute most effective weapon in the briefing, the fact filter protocol.
The fact filter protocol. This is the silver bullet because it attacks the very architecture of passive aggression. Covert hostility relies entirely on subtext. It lives in the shadows, in implied meanings and sarcastic undertones.
Right.
And the fact filter simply drags that subtext out into the blinding light of cold, chilling professionalism.
The semantic breakdown of the fact filter happens in 3 distinct steps. First, you look at the hostile message, and you literally strip away all the emotional bait, the sarcasm, the adjectives, the exaggerated punctuation.
All the exclamation points.
Yeah. Second, you identify the core factual questions or operational requirements buried beneath the hostility. And third, you reply exclusively to those facts. You treat the emotional bait as if it literally does not exist.
The source provides a perfect example for this. Imagine receiving this Slack message in a public channel. Must be nice to have endless hours to spend on formatting detailed documentation while the rest of the team is drowning in urgent escalation tickets.
Oof. The emotional bait there is so heavy. The subtext is a direct attack on your work ethic and your awareness. They're basically calling you lazy and out of touch in front of everyone.
And if I let my ego respond, I take the bait. I reply, I work just as many hours as you do, and documentation prevents future tickets. But the moment I defend myself, I validate their premise. I am down in the mud fighting their war.
You lost control.
But if I apply the fact filter protocol, I strip away the sarcasm about must be nice and drowning. Step 2. What is the actual operational fact buried in there? The fact is, they noticed I am prioritizing documentation over immediate tickets.
Exactly.
So my spiritual professional response addresses only that fact. I write, I am prioritizing the documentation sprint this week to ensure we permanently reduce the volume of repeat escalation tickets next quarter. Let me know if you would like me to review the documentation integration schedule with you during our next sync.
It is a breathtakingly effective maneuver. You have completely neutralized the kinetic energy of the attack, you offered no defense, you offered no apology, and you launched no counterattack. You simply stated the operational logic and offered a structured, professional path forward.
And the attacker just left swinging at air. Their hostility finds no purchase.
Exactly. To see how this transforms an entire organizational dynamic, we have to dissect the major case study provided in the sources, the incident of the Silent Architects review.
Oh, this case study is incredible. This isn't just an email exchange. This is a prolonged, high-stakes game of 3D chess. And analyzing it step by step shows the true power of Nishkama karma in the wild.
Right, so the scenario involves Marcus. He's a senior systems engineer brought in to redesign a massive, incredibly expensive legacy data pipeline. And the antagonist is Dave. Dave is a veteran engineer who actually built that original legacy system 8 years prior.
You can immediately diagnose the psychological threat level here. Dave's entire corporate identity is tied to that legacy system. Marcus's redesign represents an existential threat to Dave's relevance.
Yes. But because executive management mandated the modernization to reduce cloud spending, Dave knows he cannot overtly oppose the project. If he says, "I refuse to help," he just looks insubordinate.
So Dave retreats into the shadows. He adopts a strategy of passive-aggressive compliance, blending the archetypes of the chronic delayer and the CC slayer.
A deadly combo.
Right. So during the actual architectural review meetings,
Yeah.
Dave is silent. He offers no critiques. He just politely nods. But the moment Marcus requests access permissions or legacy documentation, Dave initiates sabotage via inaction. He takes days to respond, he provides fragmented data, or he directs Marcus to thousands of pages of outdated internal wikis, constantly citing his own heavy operational workload.
It's friction designed to look exactly like incompetence. But then Dave escalates to active covert sabotage. He begins sending late-night emails to the VP of Engineering, CCing Marcus.
Classic CC Slayer move.
Exactly. And the semantic structure of Dave's emails is textbook weaponized civility, he writes. Just checking in to ensure we have adequately factored in the potential disaster recovery risks of Marcus's new pipeline design. The legacy system was specifically hardened against those exact regional failure modes, and I want to make sure we aren't exposing the company to unnecessary risk.
The genius of Dave's attack is that it frames him as the loyal protector of the company. Just checking in. He's planting massive seeds of doubt in the executive's mind while maintaining this pristine veneer of helpful oversight.
Now, put yourself in Marcus's shoes. He is working 60 hours a week to build this pipeline, and he sees these late-night poisoned emails trying to destroy his credibility. The natural amygdala-driven response is fury.
Obviously. Marcus wants to hit reply all, attach the logs showing all of Dave's delays, and expose Dave's lack of cooperation to the VP. He wants to go to war and destroy Dave's reputation.
But if Marcus does that, he looks like a volatile defensive engineer attacking a helpful, concerned veteran. He loses the political high ground instantly.
So what does he do?
Instead, Marcus applies the armor. He grounds himself in Samatvam. He looks at Dave's email not as a threat, but through the lens of depersonalization. He recognizes that Dave is not some evil mastermind plotting his demise. Dave is a terrified human being who fears his 8 years of hard work are about to be thrown in the trash.
Wow. So Marcus completely detaches his ego from the need to win the email thread. He relinquishes the outcome. And by doing so, he unlocks the ability to transmute the hostility entirely.
How does he reply?
Marcus replies to the thread, completely ignoring the passive-aggressive tone. He uses the fact filter. What is the operational fact? Disaster recovery risk.
Yes.
So Marcus addresses it head-on, but he does so by elevating Dave. Marcus replies, adding a comprehensive disaster recovery and legacy risk hardening module to his proposal. And he explicitly publicly credits Dave's original architecture for laying the critical groundwork for this security protocol.
He validates the very ego Dave was trying to protect.
Exactly. But Marcus doesn't stop at the email. He moves to dismantle the threat entirely. He schedules a one-on-one session with Dave. And he approaches Dave not as a saboteur, but as an elder statesman. He asks him, Dave, you built the foundation that allowed this company to scale. What blind spots do I have in this new design that only your 8 years of historical context could identify?
The psychology of what happens next is profound. Dave's passive aggression instantly dissolves.
Just evaporates.
Why? Because hostility is a defense mechanism against a threat. Marcus systematically dismantled the threat to Dave's ego and his relevance. By converting potential conflict into respected involvement, Marcus neutralized the entire organizational landmine. He got the historical data he needed, he delivered the pipeline on time, and he maintained his own complete internal composure.
The tactical discipline required to execute that is immense, and the sources add one crucial boundary to this kind of execution, which they call the boundary of clean execution. When you are met with vague, passive resistance, never over-explain.
Never.
Never write a 5-paragraph email justifying your technical decisions. You state the logical reasoning clearly once, you provide the documentation, you offer a structured path forward, and then you proceed. Over-explaining signals insecurity and just invites the attacker to debate your premise endlessly.
You do your duty, as the Gita commands, and you move forward. The facts stand on their own.
This framework is a total superpower for an individual contributor navigating a toxic hierarchy. But reading this, the sources recognize a massive gap here. What if you are a manager?
Ah, yes. The leadership pivot.
What if you are a team lead because your personal internal armor isn't sufficient when your entire engineering pod or your marketing team is taking fire from a toxic executive suite? Section 5 of the briefing pivots entirely to leadership within hostile ecosystems.
Right, the mandate for a leader changes completely. Surviving passive aggression is no longer enough. You have a fiduciary and a moral duty to shield your direct reports from absorbing the organization's toxicity. The briefing outlines the leader's role as the architect of a safe oasis. You act as a semi-permeable membrane between your team and the wider company.
So the wider company might be this Machiavellian nightmare of ghost approvers and CC slayers, but the internal culture of your specific team must operate on completely different physics.
Exactly. It requires the deliberate construction of psychological safety. As a leader, you must actively, explicitly normalize direct, constructive conflict within your ranks. You force the friction above ground.
How so?
Well, you encourage junior engineers to openly critique senior designs in sprint plannings. You do this so that quiet resentment never has the oxygen to fester and metastasize into passive aggression internally.
That makes sense. But what when the toxicity originates from above, like from executive leadership or adjacent departments?
Then the manager must practice transmutative leadership. When a VP hands down a toxic, panic-driven, passive-aggressive mandate, the leader cannot simply forward that email to the team.
Oh man, we've all had managers who just hit forward on a panic email. It's the worst.
It's terrible leadership. The leader must act as the fact filter for the entire pod. You absorb the emotional noise, you extract only the core operational metrics and deadlines, and you pass exclusively those actionable requirements down to your team. You never, ever pass the panic down.
You digest the stress so they don't have to. And a huge part of this is how leaders handle data. The sources are adamant about the refusal to weaponize metrics, logs, JIRA trackers, performance KPIs. In a toxic culture, these are used as surveillance tools for public humiliation.
Yes. But in the safe oasis, the leader ensures these are used strictly for continuous, blameless improvement.
To illustrate this protective umbrella in action, the sources provide the case study of Elena and the major outage. This scenario tests transmutative leadership under maximum operational stress.
Let's lay out the scenario.
Okay, so Elena is an engineering team lead managing 6 site reliability engineers. They are in the absolute trenches, fighting a critical, multi-region database outage caused by an upstream vendor patch. The company is bleeding revenue by the minute. Adrenaline is maxed out.
Everyone is stressed.
Right. And in the middle of this firefight, an executive from the sales department who is losing commissions due to the outage decides to fire off a wildly toxic message in a public, company-wide Slack channel with hundreds of participants watching.
A classic public shaming maneuver.
He writes, "Hope the SRE team is enjoying their leisurely afternoon coffee while customer transactions are failing across the entire East Coast region. Would be great if we could get an update this century, assuming anyone is actually working on this."
It is an egregious display of public mockery, and it's designed entirely to secure political cover for the executive so he can tell his clients, look, I'm yelling at engineering, it's their fault.
Exactly. Now consider the neurobiology of Elena in this moment. She is already managing massive cognitive load, troubleshooting the outage. When she reads that public attack, her amygdala screams for retribution. Her team is redlining, skipping meals to fix the issue, and this feels like a profound public betrayal.
If she reacts from that space of anger, she destroys everything. If she starts a Slack war with the executive, her entire team gets distracted. The spectacle consumes the operational bandwidth.
But Elena's wearing the spiritual armor. She grounds herself in samatvam. She observes the spike in her own heart rate, but she decouples it from her keyboard. She looks at the executive's message through the lens of depersonalization. He's not attacking her team's competence. He is terrified of missing his quarterly targets.
So she applies a transmutation. Elena immediately posts a firm, completely emotionless, factual status update in the main public channel. She strips away all the bait about the coffee and the century.
What does she write?
She writes, current status, Root cause identified as upstream vendor patch failure. The engineering team is actively routing traffic to secondary redundant clusters. Mitigation is 60% complete. Next status update will be provided in exactly 15 minutes at 14:30 UTC.
Wow. It is a surgical strike of professionalism.
Yeah.
The drama is instantly neutralized because she provided pure, dense competence. She gave the executive nothing to push back against.
But the true act of leadership happens simultaneously in the background. While she posts that public update, she messages her private internal SRE team channel.
Her safe oasis.
Exactly. She tells them, ignore the noise in the main channel. Do not read it. You are doing phenomenal work under immense pressure. Focus entirely on the mitigation steps. I am handling all external communications and executive management.
Elena became the shield. By absorbing the toxicity and projecting only operational clarity, she prevented her engineers' prefrontal cortices from being hijacked by the Slack drama. They remained in a state of deep, focused flow.
And the measurable outcome of that leadership. Because the team was shielded, they restored regional services 20 minutes ahead of the projected schedule.
That is the ultimate proof of concept. The armor isn't just a philosophy for feeling better, it is a mechanism for superior execution. But, reading through these frameworks, I kept hitting a practical wall.
What's the wall?
How does a leader, or an individual contributor for that matter, reliably distinguish between a colleague who is actively, maliciously, passive-aggressive like Dave plotting in the shadows versus someone who simply lacks basic communication skills? What if they aren't a covert saboteur? What if they just genuinely write terrible, blunt, ambiguous emails?
That's a really fair question. But the elegance of the spiritual armor is that it renders that distinction entirely irrelevant.
Irrelevant.
It doesn't matter if it is calculated malice or genuine incompetence. Whether the person is plotting your downfall or simply lacks emotional intelligence, the protocol remains identical. The fact filter and the practice of depersonalization keep you functioning smoothly regardless. You respond only to the facts, you maintain your internal composure, and you completely refuse to expend metabolic energy analyzing the sender's underlying intent.
Ah, I see.
The armor works unconditionally because it operates on your internal state, not their external reality.
It completely liberates you from having to be a mind reader. You don't have to psychoanalyze your entire department. You just have to be a filter.
Exactly.
Well, as we pull all these threads together to synthesize this paradigm shift, the ground we've covered today fundamentally rewrites the rules of engagement for the modern professional.
We really have. We've deconstructed the invisible warfare of weaponized civility, exposing exactly why overt conflict went underground and how it metabolically drains 40% of our productivity.
We've mapped the archetypes, the CC slayers, the chronic delayers, the backhanded mentors, the ghost approvers.
But more importantly, we explored the radical reframing of the corporate crucible, transforming the toxic office from a prison into a high-resistance training ground.
And we bridged the gap between the ancient battlefield of Kurukshetra and the modern cubicle. By applying Nishkama karma, severing the expectation trap, and attaching yourself purely to the craft rather than the corporate outcome. And by using the fact filter protocol to drag subtext into the light, you can achieve that unshakable, steady wisdom, the state of Sthita Prajna.
It is the evolution from being a reactive, exhausted victim of break-in culture to becoming an empowered, untouchable master of your own internal ecosystem. You are no longer subject to the weather. You are the mountain.
You are the mountain. I love that.
Right.
So for you listening right now, tomorrow morning, before you open your laptop, before you log into that Slack workspace and brace your nervous system for the hidden subtext, take 2 minutes, put the armor on, set your intention. Remember that your intrinsic worth is entirely separate from the corporate machine.
Completely separate.
Your only job tomorrow is the clean, dedicated execution of your craft. The anxiety, the projection, the petty political maneuvering, that belongs to everyone else. You do not have to carry it.
But as we close this deep dive, the source material leaves us standing on the edge of a profound, unresolved tension. It pushes the philosophy of spiritual armor to its absolute limit, moving far beyond mere protection.
Yes, and this is the thought I want you to carry with you this week. We have spent this entire time discussing how to build walls, how to protect yourself, how to shield your cognitive bandwidth from attacks. But there is one final, ultimate test of this ancient wisdom. As you master this equanimity, ask yourself this. How do you eventually maintain authentic, genuine compassion for the very colleague who is actively trying to undermine your career?
It is the ultimate transmutation. If you can truly deeply recognize that their hostility is nothing more than a desperate projection of their own fear, their insecurity, and their pain, does true spiritual armor eventually evolve? Does it transform from a shield that simply protects you into a tool that actually heals the people who are attacking you?
A completely different way to look at the battlefield. Something to think about the next time you receive an email from the CC Slayer. Until next time.